I am Marin. I'm 32 years old, and my family tried to sacrifice me for the sake of their golden child's ambitious fiancé. Before I tell you about the exact moment I wiped the smug smiles off their faces in front of 100 of their most important friends, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this, and honestly, sharing this feels like a massive weight lifting off my chest. Pour yourself a cup of coffee, or maybe a glass of wine, pull up a chair, and let me tell you a story about family, betrayal, and the sweetest serving of karma you could ever imagine. The air in the grand ballroom of the Westfield Country Club was thick with the scent of expensive white lilies and quiet, suffocating ambition. It was my older sister Talia's engagement party. I remember standing there, smoothing down the fabric of my simple navy blue dress. I had bought it on sale 3 years ago for a work conference, and next to the sea of custom silk gowns, tailored Italian suits, and glittering jewelry, I felt completely, utterly out of place. 100 people, all dressed in their absolute best, murmured approvals to one another, their crystal champagne glasses clinking like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The room was an overwhelming display of wealth and status. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms floated through the crowd carrying silver trays of caviar appetizers and tiny, complicated pastries that I didn't even know the names of. On a massive, high-definition screen set up right behind the main stage, a beautifully edited slideshow of Talia and her fiancé, Desmond, played on a continuous loop. There they were, flashing perfect, professionally whitened smiles on a yacht in Cabo. There they were again, posing in front of a snowy mountain on some exotic skiing vacation in the Swiss Alps. It was a life meticulously curated and heavily filtered for an audience. I was standing as far away from the center of attention as physically possible, near the heavy velvet drapes at the back of the room. I was a ghost at the feast, which was exactly where my family wanted me. I watched as Talia, my older sister, the golden one, the absolute pride and joy of the family, stepped up to the microphone. She was beaming, looking radiant in a custom ivory dress that probably cost more than my car. Her arm was wrapped tightly, possessively, around Desmond's waist. He stood there looking like a catalog model, his posture rigidly straight, exuding that terrifying kind of confidence that only comes from having too much money and zero consequences. "Thank you all so much for coming," Talia said, her voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system, as smooth as polished marble. "We are so incredibly blessed to share this night with our dearest friends and colleagues. And now, before we cut the cake, I'd like to invite my little sister, Marin, to say a few words. Come on up, Mare. Don't be shy." A ripple of polite, expectant applause washed over the room. Every single eye in that massive ballroom turned to me. I could feel the heat immediately crawling up my neck, a hot flash of pure anxiety. It was a power play, and Talia and I both knew it. She hadn't asked me to prepare a speech. She hadn't even mentioned this to me beforehand. She just wanted to display me, the quiet, nerdy, plainly dressed programmer, as a dull backdrop to highlight her own dazzling success. I saw Desmond lean down and whisper something in her ear, a sly, triumphant smile playing on his lips as she giggled. I forced my feet to move. I walked slowly toward the stage, my heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood floor, my heart beating a steady, cold drum against my ribs. I felt the crushing weight of their expectations, the familiar, tired script they desperately wanted me to follow. I was supposed to get up there, say something awkward and slightly embarrassing, play the role of the lovable but bumbling younger sister, and then fade quietly back into the wallpaper so they could shine. I reached the microphone, my palms sweating, and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. But tonight, the script was finally changing. To truly understand how we got to that ballroom, to that very moment with the microphone in my hand, we have to go back a few weeks. It all started at a dinner that felt like every other dinner of my entire life, until it suddenly wasn't. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of mandatory family gathering my mother, Maud, insisted upon with military precision. Family dinner sounds warm and inviting, doesn't it? It sounds like passing bowls of mashed potatoes and sharing laughs. But for me, it had always been a command performance. I was merely the supporting actor, the star of the show. The undisputed main character of our family was always Talia. That particular night, she had brought her new serious boyfriend, Desmond, to the house for what felt like a formal inspection. I remember driving to my parents' house in the suburbs, the dread sitting heavy in my stomach. I parked my reliable but dented sedan on the street because Talia's gleaming new SUV and Desmond's sleek black sports car were taking up the entire driveway. I sat in my car for a good 5 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, just taking deep breaths to brace myself for the evening. I should have known it would be different this time. Worse, even. Desmond wasn't just another one of Talia's flashy dates. When I walked through the front door, the smell of my mother's expensive pot roast filling the hallway, I found them in the living room. Desmond stood up to shake my hand. His grip was entirely too firm, the kind of handshake that tries to establish dominance immediately. He had a certain sharpness in his eyes, a predatory stillness that made the hair on my arms stand up. He worked as a director at a high-powered venture capital fund, and he wore his ambition like a perfectly tailored designer coat. We all moved to the dining room and sat around the massive, polished mahogany table that my parents were so incredibly proud of. The table was set with the good china and the heavy crystal glasses. My father, Vernon, sat at the head of the table, pouring a very expensive bottle of red wine. The conversation, as it always did, orbited exclusively around Talia. They talked endlessly about her latest commercial real estate deal, the square footage of the new office building she was leasing out, the features of her new car, her upcoming trip to Aspen. Talia even spent a solid 20 minutes gossiping about a wealthy client's messy divorce. "You wouldn't believe it," she said, waving her fork around. "They're spending thousands on a lawyer just to fight over the custody of their summer home in the Hamptons. It's ridiculous, but the commission on the sale when they finally liquidate is going to be massive." I didn't say anything. I just nodded along, picking at my roasted chicken and green beans, staring at the intricate floral pattern on my porcelain plate, trying my absolute hardest to remain invisible. The atmosphere at my end of the table felt like a funeral. I just wanted to eat my meal, help my mother clear the plates, wash the dishes, and go home to the safety of my quiet apartment. But then, right in the middle of dessert, Desmond turned his laser focus directly on me. "So, Talia tells me you're a programmer, Marin?" Desmond asked. He didn't say it nicely. He didn't ask it with genuine curiosity. The way he dragged out the word programmer made it sound like I was a termite inspector or someone who unclogged drains for a living. I put my dessert spoon down, taking a slow breath, trying to keep my voice as polite and level as possible. "I'm a data scientist," I corrected gently, offering a small, tight smile. "I run my own." He completely cut me off with a tinkling, condescending laugh. "Oh, that's adorable," he said, shaking his head. "You have your own little spreadsheet company. It's just so sweet that you have a hobby that pays the bills." The entire table erupted in laughter. And I want to be perfectly clear here, it wasn't mean, cruel, mustache-twirling villain laughter. Honestly, that would have been easier to handle because I could have gotten angry. No, this was something so much worse. It was the dismissive, patronizing kind of laughter. My sister Talia draped an arm over his shoulder, beaming at him as if he had just said the cleverest thing in the world. "He's a firecracker, isn't he?" she said, looking at my parents for validation. My mother chimed in, taking a delicate sip of her wine, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary concern she always used to mask her insults. "Marin, dear, we just worry about you. That world of startups and coding, it's just so unstable." She reached over and patted Talia's hand. "Not like Talia's work. Solid, tangible real estate. That's a real career." Then my father, Vernon, cleared his throat. It was a low, rumbling sound. That was always the universal family signal that a verdict was coming. He pointed his butter knife in my direction, his expression stern. "Your sister builds things, Marin. She deals with people with real assets, real money. You sit in a dark room and type on a keyboard all day." We just want you to have a secure future, a steady salary. Is that so wrong? I just sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap under the table, my fingernails digging into my palms. Every single word they spoke was a carefully placed stone, building a thick, suffocating wall around me. The message was loud, clear, and utterly devastating: you are less. You are not one of us. I looked across the table at Desmond. He was watching me intently over the rim of his wine glass. He had this smug, self-satisfied little smile playing on his face. He was actively testing me, pushing the boundaries to see exactly how far he could push the family's designated punching bag before I snapped. And my family was just letting him do it. Worse, they were providing the ammunition. They were thoroughly enjoying the show. The final blow came when I foolishly, stupidly tried to defend myself, to explain the magnitude of what I actually did for a living. I took a deep breath. I've been developing a forensic accounting AI, I said, trying desperately to keep my voice steady despite the hot flash of embarrassment and anger crawling up my neck. It's highly complex. It's designed to detect sophisticated financial fraud across massive data sets. Desmond rolled his eyes and waved a dismissive hand in the air, literally swatting my words away as if they were annoying gnats. "Oh, honey, leave that to the big players," he scoffed. "My firm is actually looking to acquire a small AI company right now. Real professionals. They have a brilliant algorithm that's going to completely change the game." He leaned back in his chair, looking me up and down, his eyes cold and calculating. "It's a bit out of your league." That was it. That was the final, condescending pat on the head. My sister snickered into her cloth napkin, not even trying to hide her amusement. My parents nodded in solemn agreement, completely oblivious to the massive insult that had just been hurled at their youngest daughter. I put my fork and knife down on my plate. The metallic clink was unnaturally loud in the sudden, heavy silence of the dining room. I didn't say a single word. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at him, then at Talia, then at my parents, and let the thick, uncomfortable silence hang in the air like a dark cloud. My father was the one who broke it. His face hardened. "Marin, don't be rude," he hissed sharply across the table, leaning forward. "Stop making the family look bad. Stop making them look bad. Not stand up for yourself. Not Desmond, that's enough." My role in this family, my only accepted function, was solely to absorb the hits, swallow my pride, and protect their pristine, perfect image. I picked up my fork again, my hand trembling slightly, but I couldn't bring myself to take another bite. I just sat there, staring blankly ahead. I felt like a ghost at my own family table, tasting absolutely nothing but dry ashes in my mouth. But in that exact moment, as I stared at the remnants of my dinner, something deep inside me, something that had been beaten down and dormant for years, finally began to wake up. Leaving that house couldn't happen fast enough. I helped my mother carry the dessert plates to the kitchen, washed them in complete silence while they all laughed together in the living room, and then I slipped out the front door without saying a proper goodbye. Driving home that night was an absolute blur. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The city lights blurred into long, hazy, neon streaks through my windshield. The radio was off. I needed the quiet, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. All I could hear was the laughter from the dinner table echoing relentlessly in my ears. It was a phantom chorus that had been singing the exact same cruel tune for my entire 32 years of life. It wasn't just Desmond tonight. He was merely the newest voice in a very old choir of dismissal. As I sat at a red light, staring blankly at a neon sign for a 24-hour convenience store, my mind drifted back to my childhood. I was 10 years old again. I was standing so proudly in our living room next to my school science fair project. It was a miniature volcano. I had spent 3 entire weekends meticulously crafting it from papier-mâché, painting the sides with careful strokes of brown and green acrylic paint, making sure the baking soda and vinegar chamber was perfectly sealed so it would erupt just right. I had won first place. I had the blue ribbon clutched in my hand. But when I brought it home, no one was looking at me. They were all gathered around Talia in the kitchen, cheering and clapping because she had just announced she made the junior varsity soccer team. I stood there for 20 minutes waiting for them to notice me. Eventually, I just set my blue ribbon on the coffee table. It sat there, unnoticed, for 3 days before my mother threw it in a drawer. Then came my high school graduation. I had worked myself to the bone. I was the valedictorian. I had spent weeks preparing a speech about chasing dreams, the future of technology, and how our generation was going to change the world. I rented the cap and gown. I stood at the podium, looking out into the massive auditorium. But I delivered that speech to a half-empty row of seats where my family was supposed to be. My parents and relatives had left early. Why? Because Talia had a major soccer game that afternoon. A preseason friendly match. I had to take the bus home in my graduation gown. I found them hours later at a fancy Italian restaurant, celebrating her one single goal as if she had just won the World Cup. My heavy, engraved valedictorian plaque ended up in a dusty cardboard box in the garage. It was a clear, undeniable pattern. A rigid family system. Talia was the blazing sun, and I was just a small, rocky planet stuck in a distant, cold orbit, occasionally acknowledged when convenient, but never truly seen. My passion for computers and coding was treated as a strange quirk. My quiet nature was viewed as a social deficiency they had to apologize for. My academic achievements were met with a distracted "that's nice, dear." But Talia's slightest successes? Her making a team, her getting a C in math, her getting a date? Those were causes for champagne, lavish dinners, and endless praise. The most painful memory, though, the one that still felt like a raw, open wound even as I drove through the dark streets toward my apartment, was from 5 years ago. I had just laid the foundation for my AI software, Aurelia Analytics. It was just a concept back then, lines of code on a whiteboard in my bedroom, but I knew in my gut it was a powerful one. I needed a small seed investment. I wasn't asking for millions. I just needed $20,000 to get the necessary server space and expensive software licenses to build a working prototype. I had poured my soul into preparation. I wrote a comprehensive 50-page business plan. I printed it on heavy, expensive paper and put it in a leather binder. I practiced my pitch in front of my bathroom mirror for days. Finally, I presented it to my father in his study. I remember the smell of his expensive cigars and the old leather of his armchair. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, tapping his pen, listening with a deeply pained expression, as if I were describing a terminal illness instead of a business opportunity. "Marin, I can't," he said, shaking his head slowly and sliding the heavy binder back across the desk toward me. "It's just too risky. This computer fantasy of yours. You need a real job with a real salary, benefits, a 401k. I was completely crushed. I felt like I couldn't breathe. But the real devastation, the absolute betrayal, came exactly 2 weeks later. He bought Talia a brand new, silver BMW. He tied a massive red bow on it and parked it in the driveway as a grand congratulations for her being named Salesman of the Month at her real estate agency. $20,000 would have been a mere rounding error on the down payment for that luxury car. I remember walking into the kitchen later that day. I found my mom washing vegetables at the sink. I was crying. I asked her why. Why was Talia worth a luxury car, but my dream wasn't worth a fraction of that? She didn't even stop chopping carrots. She didn't look at me. "Your father and we put a lot of money into Talia's college fund and getting her started in her career," she explained, her voice even and calm, as if she were explaining basic math to a toddler. "Her career path is a sure thing. Real estate is solid. We have to be smart with our investments, Marin. We have to plan for our retirement, our future. You understand?" I did understand. I understood perfectly. I wasn't a smart investment. I was the charity case. I was the one they hoped would just figure it out quietly on my own so I wouldn't be a drain on the family's financial resources or their precious social reputation. I sometimes wondered if they just saw us as line items, calculating our future inheritance based on our current return on investment. I never asked them for a single penny ever again. Not for rent, not for groceries, nothing. I worked 2 grueling jobs. I was a barista at 5 a.m. and did freelance data entry at night. I coded through the weekends, surviving on cheap ramen and instant coffee. I built my computer fantasy completely on my own. I was fueled by exhaustion and a quiet, burning anger. That night, as I finally pulled into my apartment complex after Desmond's cruel performance, I realized absolutely nothing had changed. In their eyes, I was still the pathetic little girl with the papier-mâché volcano, waiting for an applause that would never, ever come. They had absolutely no idea what I had built in the silence and isolation they had relegated me to. And as I turned off the engine, a cold, hard thought finally crystallized in my mind. Maybe it was time I showed them. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes. I just couldn't go home. I couldn't face the silence of my small apartment. It would have been deafening, giving my brain too much space to replay every cruel word spoken at that dinner table. Instead, I started the car back up, pulled out of the complex, and drove across town to the small, unassuming, slightly run-down office building where I rented a couple of rooms on the 2nd floor. This was the official headquarters of Aurelia Analytics. In reality, it was just a glorified, messy workspace for me and my co-founder, Jolene. The carpet was a depressing shade of brown, the heating barely worked, and the coffee machine was always broken, but it was ours. I unlocked the heavy glass door and walked in. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. I found Jolene exactly where I expected to find her on a Sunday night, hunched over her ergonomic keyboard, bathed in the blue glow of 3 massive monitors, a half-empty pizza box sitting perilously close to a stack of external hard drives. Jolene had been my best friend since our freshman year of college. She was brilliant, fiercely loyal, and she was the only person on the entire planet who saw me not as Talia's weird, disappointing sister, but as a partner, a peer, an equal. She heard the door click shut and looked up. Her eyes immediately registered the dark storm brewing on my face. She pushed her thick-rimmed glasses up her nose and let out a long sigh. "Whoa," she said, leaning back in her squeaky office chair and crossing her arms. "Let me guess. Sunday dinner at the folks' house?" I didn't even have the energy to take my coat off. I just slumped into the other cheap faux-leather chair in the room, the material groaning loudly in protest under my weight. I didn't even have to give her the full, play-by-play story. I just gave her the miserable highlights, Desmond's condescending remarks about my little spreadsheet hobby, my family's gleeful, supportive laughter, my father's final, cutting command to stop embarrassing them. Jolene listened patiently, not interrupting once. Her expression hardened with every single word I spoke. When I finally finished, running out of breath and sinking deeper into the chair, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, she spun her chair around to face her center monitor, typed a few commands with rapid, aggressive keystrokes, and pulled up a heavily encrypted file. "You know," she said, her voice dropping an octave, low and dangerous. "While you were sitting there getting verbally assaulted over your mother's dry pot roast, I was on a conference call with the M&A team from Sterling Westwood." Sterling Westwood. The name sent a jolt of electricity through my tired body. They were the massive, global tech conglomerate that was in the absolute final stages of acquiring our company. The deal was so incredibly secret, bound by ironclad NDAs, that not even my own family knew the name of my company, let alone the mind-blowing fact that it was about to make Jolene and me both very, very wealthy. "And?" I asked, sitting up slightly, my own personal problems momentarily forgotten. Jolene swiveled back to face me, a fierce, triumphant, almost feral grin breaking out on her face. "And their head of acquisitions, Mr. Sterling himself, called. He didn't just ask about the company. He asked about you, Marin. You specifically. He called you the single most valuable asset in this entire massive deal." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. He said, her brain is the reason we're paying 8 figures. Marin, they want to offer you a massive promotion. He wants you to lead their entire new AI innovation division after the merger goes through. The words just hung in the stale air of the office. It was a stark, dizzying contrast to the painful echoes of my family's ridicule that were still ringing in my ears. A hobby that pays the bills. A little spreadsheet company. Out of your league. They don't know, Mare, Jolene said, her voice softening significantly as she looked at my shocked face. They have absolutely no idea who you are or what you've built. They don't want to know, I said, the bitter taste rising in my throat again, choking out my excitement. They have the version of me they're perfectly comfortable with. The failure. The weirdo. It makes Talia look better by comparison. Jolene nodded slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. So, what are you going to do about it? The question was so simple, just a handful of words, but the answer felt monumental. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. For years, my entire life really, I had done absolutely nothing. I had absorbed the insults. I had accepted my role as the designated loser. But sitting there in that dingy office, listening to the quiet, powerful hum of the servers that held my life's work, I felt a massive, seismic shift inside my chest. It was about the why. Why did I work so incredibly hard? Why did I sacrifice sleep, a social life, dating, vacations, everything, for 5 long years? It wasn't just to build a piece of software. It was to prove something. To myself, and to them. Right on cue, as if the universe had a sick sense of humor, my phone buzzed violently against the cheap wooden desk. I picked it up. It was an email. The subject line was festive, adorned with annoying digital confetti emojis. You're invited, Talia and Desmond's engagement party. I opened it. It was a lavish, formal electronic invitation. A grand celebration of the union that had, just hours before, tried to casually break my spirit over dessert. They were inviting me back into the fold, fully expecting me to RSVP yes, show up in a drab dress, smile for the cameras, and play my pathetic, silent part in their perfect family portrait. It was a test. A demand for my total surrender. Jolene stood up, walked over, and looked at the glowing screen over my shoulder. You're not actually going to that, are you? She asked, her nose wrinkling in disgust. I looked from the screen up to Jolene. I felt a strange calm wash over me, and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. Oh, I'm going, I said, my voice shockingly steady. I wouldn't miss it for the world. For 2 agonizing days, I stared at that digital invitation on my laptop screen. It sat in my inbox like a ticking time bomb. Part of me, the old, conditioned part of me that just wanted peace, wanted to hit delete, send a polite "so sorry, can't make it" excuse, and retreat back into the comfortable safety of my code. It would be easier. It would be quieter. But every single time I closed my eyes, I saw Desmond's smug, punchable smile. I heard my father's harsh hiss, "Stop making the family look bad." This wasn't just an invitation to eat cake. It was a summons to court. They were telling me, without words, to come back, get in line, accept Talia as the new queen of the family, and accept my permanent place at the absolute bottom of the pecking order. My refusal to go would be seen as bitter petulance. My attendance would be seen as submission. I was hovering my mouse over the archive button for the 10th time when a new email popped up at the top of my screen. It was from an anonymous, heavily encrypted address. The kind of thing that immediately sets off alarm bells for someone in my line of work. The subject line was just 3 capitalized letters, VCF. VCF. Venture Capital Fund. Desmond's World. My heart started beating much faster, thumping against my ribs. Against my better judgment, I clicked open the message. It was short, terrifyingly cryptic, and straight to the point: be careful. VCF isn't buying. They're stealing. They're trying to reverse engineer the algorithm of their AI acquisition target. The director leading it thinks the founder is some small-time chump they can roll over. Don't be that chump. I just stared at the glowing words on the screen, a wave of cold dread washing over my entire body. There were dozens of AI companies VCF could be targeting. It could be a massive coincidence. It could be a wrong number, a case of mistaken identity. But my mind immediately flashed back to the dining room table. My firm is actually looking to acquire a small AI company right now. They have a brilliant algorithm. Desmond's words echoed loudly in my head. Then, I remembered the probing questions he had asked, carefully disguised as condescending jabs. The way he had pressed for specific details about the programming language I used and my data processing framework. It wasn't just mockery. It was targeted reconnaissance. He was sizing up the target. The anonymous email was a warning shot from a whistleblower on the inside. My hand started to shake violently over my keyboard, but not with fear. I was trembling with a sudden, incandescent rage. Desmond had sat at my parents' table, eaten their food, laughed right in my face, and all the while he was actively, maliciously planning to gut my company and steal my life's work. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of it was breathtaking. And my family, my own family, had essentially handed him the knife. They had presented me on a silver platter. Here is Marin, the family fool, the harmless nerd whose little hobby wasn't worth a second thought. Desmond was counting heavily on me being exactly the person they all thought I was: weak, non-confrontational, and easily dismissed. I stood up and started pacing the length of my cramped office, my mind racing a mile a minute. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. This was way bigger than a family insult. This was highly illegal corporate espionage. This was grand theft, and Desmond was the mastermind at the center of it. I walked back to my desk, pulled the engagement party invitation back up on my screen, and clicked RSVP, attending one guest. The game had officially changed. They thought they were inviting a docile sister to a party, but I was coming as a forensic auditor, and I was going to conduct a full public analysis of their lies. But the anonymous tip was just a spark. I needed concrete, undeniable proof. For the next 48 hours, Jolene and I lived in a state of hyper-focused, manic intensity. We completely turned our office into a war room. We ordered takeout, lived on black coffee, and fueled ourselves with the grim, cold satisfaction of the hunt. I started exactly where any data scientist would start: the raw data. I began a massive, exhaustive deep dive into our server access logs. Aurelia's core algorithm was heavily protected by military-grade layers of security, but we did have a sandbox demo version. We provided login credentials for this demo to potential investors under incredibly strict non-disclosure agreements. Sterling Westwood had accessed it, of course. I checked their logs. Their activity was perfectly clean, totally professional. They respected the digital boundaries. Then I searched for another specific set of access credentials. The ones we had tentatively issued to VCF, Desmond's fund, months ago when they had first reached out with a generic inquiry. The logs told a terrifying, undeniable story. Their initial access was normal, standard queries, basic UI testing. But over the last 7 days, right around the time Talia introduced Desmond to the family, the activity had become incredibly aggressive. They weren't just testing the software's capabilities anymore. They were hammering the firewalls, looking for cracks. There were repeated, forceful attempts to access the restricted source code directory. Our security blocked all of them, but they were relentlessly trying to look under the hood. It was the digital equivalent of a burglar trying to pick the lock on your front door with a crowbar. It was damning evidence, but in a court of law, it was technically circumstantial. I needed a direct, irrefutable link to Desmond. And that's when a much darker, more painful thought occurred to me. How did Desmond even know enough about my specific project to target me in the first place? I was pathologically private about my work. I never talked about it online. Only Jolene, a few trusted contractors, and my family knew. My heart sank into my stomach. In my foolish, optimistic moments over the years, I had tried to explain my work to my family, desperately hoping for just a glimmer of interest or pride. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember. A family barbecue, about 3 months ago. The smell of burning charcoal and cheap hot dogs. I was standing by the cooler, talking to my cousin Silas. Silas was always the good cousin, the one who seemed to actually listen when I spoke. I had stupidly told him about a major breakthrough I'd just had with the AI's predictive modeling. Talia had wandered over, a hard seltzer in her hand, and overheard us. "Still tinkering with that robot brain of yours, Mare," she had joked loudly. "You should get a real hobby, like tennis." Silas had defended me at the time. "No, Mare's building something big," he had said. Now, a sickening, terrifying suspicion formed in my gut. Talia had heard. And Talia talked to Desmond. I sat up straight, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I pulled up our network traffic analysis tools. I started cross-referencing the IP addresses that had been running the brute force attacks on our servers. Most of them were heavily masked behind corporate VPNs, bouncing all over the globe. But hackers are human, and humans get lazy. A few of the earlier, sloppier attempts weren't masked at all. They traced back to a specific residential IP address in the city. I ran a quick ISP lookup. The result popped up on the screen, and it felt like a physical punch to the gut. The address was registered to Silas. My cousin. The one who had always seemed to be in my corner. He hadn't just been listening politely at that barbecue. He had been actively gathering information, and he had passed it on to the highest bidder. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply personal, it literally left me breathless. This wasn't just Desmond being a corporate shark. This was a family affair. I grabbed my cell phone and called Silas immediately. I didn't care that it was late. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey Mare, what's up?" he answered, sounding cheerful. No preamble. No small talk. "Why, Silas?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet and shaking with suppressed rage. There was a long, confusing pause on the other end of the line. "Marin, what are you talking about?" he asked, sounding genuinely bewildered. For a split second, I almost doubted myself. "The IP address, Silas," I said, gripping the phone so tight my hand ached. "The one that's been trying to forcefully breach my company's servers for the past week. It's registered to your apartment." The silence that followed was heavy, thick, and suffocating with guilt. I could hear his sharp, panicked intake of breath through the speaker. He was caught red-handed. I don't know what you mean," he stammered weakly, but the lie was paper-thin and pathetic. "Cut the crap," I snapped, my patience entirely gone. "Did you tell them? Did you sit down and tell Talia and Desmond about my project? Did you give them the specs?" He finally broke. His voice dropped to a pathetic, whining whisper. I just mentioned it to Talia. I swear, Marin. I thought it was cool what you were doing. I was bragging about you to them." "Bragging?" I let out a harsh, loud, humorless laugh that echoed in the empty office. "You gave them the keys to the kingdom, Silas. You told them just enough technical detail for them to find me, to target my servers." "I didn't know he was going to do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I swear to God, Marin. Talia just said Desmond's company was interested in tech stuff and I just casually mentioned your startup. I had no idea." I knew that was a lie, too. Silas worked as an analyst in finance. He knew exactly what interested in tech stuff meant when it came from a ruthless VC shark like Desmond. He hadn't done it out of pride for me. He had done it to ingratiate himself with Talia, the successful, wealthy branch of the family tree. He had sold my deepest secret just to get a few pats on the back from the golden child. He had chosen a side. "It doesn't matter what you knew," I said, my voice turning to pure ice. "It only matters what you did." I could hear him starting to hyperventilate. Please, Marin, please don't tell your parents or Talia. I could lose my job if this gets out. It was a mistake. A mistake. Betraying years of trust was a mistake. Helping a predator target his own cousin was a mistake. The casualness of it, the absolute cowardice, was almost worse than the act itself. He wasn't sorry for what he did to me. He was just terrified he got caught, worried about the consequences for himself, worried about needing a lawyer. Don't worry, Silas, I said, the absolute coldness in my own voice surprising me. I'm not going to tell anyone. Oh, thank God, Marin. I'm going to show them, I interrupted fiercely. All of them. And I hung up the phone before he could say another word, leaving him to sweat and stew in the silence of his own treachery. The confirmation of Silas's absolute betrayal was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Hanging up that phone, I didn't feel like crying. I didn't feel the sting of rejection anymore. What I felt was a profound, icy clarity settling deep into my bones. The last thread of doubt, the tiny, lingering whisper of hope that this was all just a massive misunderstanding, completely vanished. This was a highly coordinated attack on my livelihood, and my own family, my own blood, had been entirely complicit. I turned my chair back to face Jolene. The harsh fluorescent light of the office caught the dark circles under her eyes. She had heard enough of my end of the phone call to piece it together. They're trying to steal all of it, I told her, my face set like a stone mask. Desmond isn't just snooping. He's actively trying to gut our servers before the Sterling Westwood merger goes through. Jolene's expression was incredibly grim. She pushed her heavy glasses up her nose and cracked her knuckles. So, we fight back. We shut down their IP, we call our lawyer, and we slap them with a massive corporate espionage lawsuit. No, I said, a new, chilling sense of strategy washing over me. I stood up and walked over to the small, greasy whiteboard hanging on the far wall. We don't fight back right now. If we involve a lawyer today, they'll just scrub their hard drives, hire a massive legal team, and bury us in paperwork for years. Desmond will slither his way out of it. We let them think they are winning. Jolene raised an eyebrow, spinning her chair around. What are you thinking, Mare? We are going to set a trap, I said, grabbing a dry erase marker. A beautiful, elegant, absolutely inescapable digital trap. And that grand, ridiculously expensive engagement party on Saturday? That is exactly where we are going to spring it. For the next 4 days, Jolene and I completely transformed from simple programmers into architects of a downfall. We worked with the ruthless precision of surgeons. The absolute core of our trap was a highly specific piece of code I wrote entirely myself from scratch. We affectionately called it the honeypot. We stayed up for nearly 48 hours straight. My eyes burned, my back ached from the terrible office chair, and I was surviving entirely on lukewarm delivery coffee and sheer, unadulterated willpower. We created a brand new, completely isolated section of our demo server. It was meticulously designed to look exactly like a fatal vulnerability, a sloppy backdoor left open by an amateur coder. It looked like a direct, unguarded path into the Holy of Holies, the actual source code for Aurelia's predictive algorithm. It was an absolutely irresistible piece of bait for a greedy thief who firmly believed he was the smartest person in any room. But the honeypot had a deeply hidden secret. The exact millisecond anyone from Desmond's IP address accessed that specific directory, it would trigger a silent, undetectable alarm on our end. More importantly, it would instantly begin to record absolutely everything. It would log every single keystroke. It would take high-definition screen recordings of their activity. And the absolute masterstroke, the piece of code I was most proud of, was that it would discreetly activate the microphone on the user's computer. We wouldn't just see what Desmond and his team were trying to steal. We would hear them planning it in real time. Are you absolutely sure about this? Jolene asked on Thursday night. She was staring at the elegant, vicious lines of code scrolling down her monitor. The glow illuminated the deep exhaustion on her face. This is playing really dirty, Marin. Legally, it's a massive gray area. They started playing dirty the moment he sat at my parents' dinner table and smiled in my face while planning to rob me, I replied, not taking my eyes off my own screen. I'm just making sure I win the game. We baited the hook on Friday morning. We sent out a routine, incredibly boring system update email to all of our current demo users, casually mentioning a temporary, 24-hour relaxation of certain security protocols for scheduled server maintenance. It was just enough of an opening to make a highly curious, aggressive attacker pounce. Now, we just had to plan the big reveal. My initial, angry thought was to just gather the evidence, send a massive file to the Sterling Westwood executive team, and let them handle the corporate execution quietly. But as I sat in the office, listening to the hum of the hard drives, I realized that simply wasn't enough. A quiet, behind-closed-doors corporate firing wouldn't fix the deep, festering root of the problem. It wouldn't lance the massive, toxic wound my family had been inflicting on me for 3 decades. This had to be public. It had to be absolutely undeniable. They needed to see exactly who I was, and exactly who the golden couple really was, under the bright, unforgiving lights of their own manufactured stage. That is exactly when a crucial, almost unbelievable piece of information landed right in my lap. Jolene was on a final, agonizingly long logistics call with Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Westwood, finalizing some minor details of our upcoming promotion packages and salary structures for the new division. I was sitting at my desk, organizing files, only half listening. As they were wrapping up the call, Mr. Sterling mentioned his upcoming weekend plans. I have to fly out to the East Coast tomorrow for a massive engagement party, he had said over the speakerphone, letting out a heavy, tired sigh. The daughter of an old business associate is getting married. A fellow named Vernon. Jolene literally dropped her pen. It clattered loudly against the desk. She hit the mute button so fast she almost knocked over her coffee mug. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated shock. I mouthed the word Vernon back at her. She unmuted the phone, her voice completely casual. Oh, engagement parties can be a lot of fun, Mr. Sterling. Anyone we might know? Doubtful, he chuckled warmly. A young woman named Talia and a guy named Desmond from VCF. It's going to be a stuffy affair, but I have to make an appearance. It was a staggering, astronomical coincidence. It felt like a direct gift from the universe itself. My accuser, my judge, and my greatest professional champion were all going to be standing in the exact same room. The man who had just personally reviewed my code and called my brain an 8-figure asset would be there, holding a glass of champagne, to witness Desmond's treachery firsthand. The stage wasn't just set anymore, it was fully loaded with an all-star cast. The final piece of my puzzle was the actual delivery mechanism. I needed a foolproof way to play the damning evidence for the entire ballroom to see and hear. I found the phone number for the Westfield Country Club on their incredibly pretentious website. I called the main line and asked to speak to the head event coordinator for the weekend. A woman named Isabel answered, her tone brisk and highly stressed. I took a deep breath and completely shifted my voice, adopting the high, slightly breathless tone of an overly enthusiastic bridesmaid. Hi Isabel, my name is Sarah, I'm a friend of Talia's, I lied flawlessly. I'm helping put together a massive surprise video tribute for the happy couple tomorrow night. It has messages from all their college friends. I just really need to ensure my personal laptop can connect flawlessly to your main projector on the stage. Talia will be absolutely devastated if it doesn't work. Isabel immediately softened. Oh, a surprise video. How wonderful. Yes, of course, Sarah. We have a dedicated AV table right at the side of the main stage. It has a direct HDMI feed to the main screen and it patches straight into our surround sound system. Just bring your laptop to me before the guests arrive, and I'll have my tech guy set you up. You are an absolute lifesaver, Isabel, I gushed. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. Everything was perfectly in place. The digital trap was set and waiting on the server. The high-profile audience was confirmed. The AV logistics were completely locked down. All I had to do now was wait for the mouse to take the cheese. The night before the party, I finally went back to my own apartment. I unlocked the door and the heavy, thick silence of the empty rooms immediately washed over me. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and just stood in the middle of my small kitchen. Suddenly, a massive, crushing wave of doubt hit me so hard I actually had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. The sheer, terrifying weight of what I was about to do felt immense. This wasn't just a clever corporate takedown anymore. This was a literal declaration of war on my own family. It was a bridge-burning act from which there would be absolutely no return. If I pressed that button tomorrow night, my relationship with my parents, with my sister, with my entire extended family, would be dead and buried. I paced the length of my small living room, my mind racing. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on to boil water for tea, just to have something to do with my shaking hands. I found myself aimlessly scrolling through the contacts on my phone, desperately looking for a lifeline. I stopped on a name I hadn't called in almost 4 years, Dr. Nadine. Dr. Nadine had been my graduate school advisor. She was a brilliant, sharp-witted, and incredibly kind woman who had seen the raw potential in me back when I was just a nervous, stuttering kid full of crazy ideas about artificial intelligence. She was infinitely more of a mentor, and frankly more of a mother figure, than Maud had ever been to me. I sat down on my cheap sofa and dialed her number, holding my breath, half expecting it to go straight to voicemail. She picked up on the second ring. "Marin," she said. Her voice was just as warm, rich, and sharp as I remembered it. To what do I owe this incredibly unexpected pleasure? I didn't even know where to begin. The dam just broke. I started talking, and I couldn't stop. I told her absolutely everything. I poured out the years of being overshadowed, the humiliation of the family dinners, Desmond's cruel mockery, the devastating betrayal by my cousin Silas, the corporate espionage, and the elaborate, public trap I had just spent a week building. I laid it all out on the table, the whole ugly, tangled, painful mess. She listened in complete silence. She didn't interrupt once, not even to gasp or judge. The only sound was her steady breathing on the other end of the line and the ticking of the cheap wall clock in my kitchen. When I finally finished, completely out of breath and wiping angry tears from my face, the line was silent for a very long time. I suddenly felt foolish. I thought maybe I had shocked her, or worse, that she would think I was being a petty, vengeful, dramatic child. "That is quite a heavy piece of luggage to carry around, Marin," she said finally, her voice thick with empathy. "And quite an elaborate, explosive plan you have constructed. It is both brilliant and terrifying." "I don't know if I can actually go through with it," I confessed, my voice cracking. The words tasted like failure in my mouth. "It feels so destructive. It feels mean." "It is destructive," she agreed softly. "But Marin, sometimes you have to burn down a forest that is sick and rotting to allow new, healthy things to grow. Let me ask you one single question, and I want you to sit in the quiet and think very carefully before you answer me." I held my breath. "Okay. What is your actual goal here tomorrow night? Is it revenge, or is it liberation?" The question cut straight through all my chaotic anger, the exhaustion, and the deep confusion. Revenge. The word felt hot, heavy, and incredibly satisfying in my chest. I wanted them to feel the exact same stinging humiliation I had felt my entire life. I wanted to see the absolute horror on Desmond's face when his perfectly constructed world came crashing down. I wanted Talia to cry. But then I forced myself to think about what came the day after revenge. The screaming matches, the endless accusations, the inevitable, messy family fallout. If I did this just to hurt them, I would still be tied to them. I would just be playing a new, uglier role in their twisted family drama. Liberation. That felt completely different. That word felt like a deep breath of fresh air. It felt like peace. It wasn't about hurting them, it was about finally, definitively telling the absolute truth. It was for the sole purpose of setting myself completely free. Free from their suffocating expectations. Free from the pathetic role they had forcibly cast me in. Free from the exhausting, crushing weight of chasing their approval, which I finally, truly realized I was never going to get. Liberation, I answered aloud, my voice quiet in the empty apartment, but absolutely certain. I just want to be free of them. Then your path is incredibly clear, Dr. Nadine said. Do not act out of anger tomorrow. Act strictly out of truth. Present your facts calmly and clearly. Your goal is not to destroy them, but to finally reclaim your own narrative. The consequences of their terrible actions are for them to deal with, not you. Your only responsibility is to your own integrity. We talked for a little while longer, mostly about her new rescue dog and my new apartment, but those specific words were exactly what I needed to hear. She had handed me a compass in the dark. I wasn't going to that country club as an angry, vengeful victim. I was going as a truth-teller. I was going to state my case, present my undeniable evidence, drop the microphone, and walk away, leaving the burning wreckage behind for those who had built it. I hung up the phone, and a profound, heavy sense of calm finally settled over my shoulders. The crippling doubt was completely gone. In its place was a quiet, unshakable resolve. I finally went to sleep. The day of the party, I woke up feeling surprisingly rested. I took my time getting ready. I didn't buy a new dress. I went into my closet and pulled out the classic, well-tailored navy blue suit dress I wore to major investor meetings. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't covered in sequins, but it was armor. It was confident. I wanted to look like I belonged in a boardroom, not like the tragic charity case they always treated me as. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, no-nonsense bun. I looked in the mirror, took one deep breath, and grabbed my laptop bag. I arrived at the Westfield Country Club fashionably late. The parking valet took my dented sedan without a word, though I saw him glance at the luxury cars lining the drive. I walked through the heavy glass double doors, the sound of a live string quartet drifting through the opulent lobby. I immediately found Isabel, the stressed event coordinator, near the coat check. I smiled warmly, handed over my laptop, and she quickly scurried off to the AV booth to plug it in and set up my remote clicker, completely unsuspecting of the bomb she was helping me wire to the stage. I took a deep breath, pushed open the massive mahogany doors, and stepped into the grand ballroom. The room was absolutely buzzing. Waiters were circulating with trays of champagne. I immediately spotted my parents holding court near the massive ice sculpture. They were laughing uproariously with some wealthy-looking people I didn't recognize. They saw me approaching. My mother, Maud, stopped laughing instantly. She gave me a tight, incredibly forced little wave, her eyes quickly scanning my plain navy dress with obvious disapproval before scanning the rest of the room for someone significantly more important to talk to. It didn't take long for the happy couple to find me. They gravitated toward me like sharks smelling blood in the water. Talia swaggered over, a crystal flute of expensive champagne balanced delicately in her manicured hand. Desmond was securely attached to her arm, looking incredibly smug in a custom tuxedo that probably cost a small fortune. "Well, look who it is," Talia said, her voice dripping with fake, sugary sweetness. She didn't offer a hug. "Glad you could make it, Mare. For a second there, I honestly thought you might be too busy hiding in your darkroom with your, you know." She waved her hand vaguely in the air, her heavy diamond engagement ring catching the chandelier light, as if trying to grasp the confusing concept of my highly technical job out of thin air. Desmond smiled at me, a venomously sweet, predatory expression. "We were literally just talking about you, Marin," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "I was just telling Talia how incredibly impressed I am with your dedication. It's just so rare to see someone so passionately devoted to their little side projects. Even when they don't really go anywhere." The bait was painfully obvious. They desperately wanted a reaction. They wanted me to get flustered, to angrily defend myself, to make a scene so they could point and whisper about how unstable and jealous I was. They wanted me to play my pathetic part in their little drama. But Dr. Nadine's words echoed loudly in my head. Act out of truth, not anger. So, I didn't frown. I didn't cross my arms. I looked right into Desmond's cold eyes and I smiled back. A calm, genuine, completely unbothered smile. Thanks, Desmond, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly even. That actually means a lot. In fact, my little side project is about to have a very, very big week. I honestly can't wait to see what the future holds for all of us. My bizarre response completely threw them off balance. It absolutely wasn't what they were expecting. Desmond's eyes narrowed dangerously for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face, before his perfect, fake smile snapped rigidly back into place. Talia just looked confused. Just then, a man with a distinctive shock of silver hair, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and carrying an aura of quiet, absolute authority, approached our small, tense group. My heart gave a massive, joyful leap against my ribs. It was Mr. Sterling. My father, Vernon, had spotted him too and came hurrying over from the ice sculpture, practically tripping over his own expensive shoes. His face was stretched into a massive, sycophantic grin. Mr. Sterling. So incredibly glad you could make it, my father gushed, extending both hands. You know my brilliant daughter, Talia, of course, and this is her fiancé, Desmond. He's a director over at VCF. Very big things happening for him. Mr. Sterling shook their hands politely, offering a generic, wealthy guy nod. Congratulations to you both. Lovely party, Vernon. Mr. Sterling's sharp eyes then drifted past them and landed directly on me. He paused. I saw a flicker of genuine recognition light up his gaze. He knew my face from our intense, hours-long video conference calls over the past month. I saw the question form in his mind as he tried to figure out why the lead developer of his massive new acquisition was standing at this random country club party. Oh, and this is our younger daughter, Marin, my father said, waving a hand in my direction almost as an embarrassing afterthought, wanting to quickly move the conversation back to Desmond's venture capital fund. Mr. Sterling's thick silver eyebrows shot straight up toward his hairline. He completely ignored my father, stepped right past Desmond, and extended his hand directly to me. His grip was firm, warm, and deeply respectful. Marin. It is an absolute pleasure to finally meet you in person, Mr. Sterling said, his voice booming slightly over the string quartet. We are all incredibly excited about the unbelievable work you've been doing. The board was reviewing your final architecture today. Absolutely brilliant. A heavy, confused, totally suffocating silence fell over my family. Talia looked from Mr. Sterling to me, her mouth slightly open, a deep frown creasing her perfectly powdered forehead. Desmond's smug smile completely tightened at the edges, his eyes darting back and forth. My father looked utterly, completely bewildered, like he had just been spoken to in a foreign language. Wait, you two, you know each other? My father stammered, looking at Mr. Sterling. In a manner of speaking, Vernon, Mr. Sterling said smoothly, his eyes twinkling with amusement as he looked at my family's shocked faces. Marin is a bit of a legend over in our R&D department. The things this young woman builds are going to change the entire financial sector. Before anyone in my family could even begin to process this massive shift in reality, Desmond, ever the arrogant opportunist, jumped right in to desperately reclaim control of the narrative. Oh, Marin is just full of little surprises, Desmond said with a tight, forced laugh. He turned to me, his voice dripping with condescension, completely unaware of the trap he was standing in. I sincerely hope that one day your little company gets noticed by a major fund like mine. You just have to keep dreaming and hustling, right? That was the line. That was the final, arrogant, incredibly stupid jab. It was the absolute perfect cue. I looked at him, feeling an overwhelming sense of calm. I gave him a serene, almost pitying smile. You know, Desmond, I said, my voice just loud enough for our little circle to hear clearly, I think you're going to be very, very interested in what happens next. Right at that exact moment, up on the main stage, the event MC was tapping the microphone. Tap, tap, tap. The sharp sound echoed through the ballroom, cutting through the chatter. It was time for the champagne toasts. It was time for my show to finally begin. Talia, absolutely basking in the spotlight and completely forgetting the weird interaction with Mr. Sterling, practically ran to the stage. She grabbed the microphone and gave a short, incredibly self-congratulatory speech. She thanked everyone for coming, praised Desmond profusely for being the smartest, most handsome man in finance, and then, with a wide, smug grin aimed directly at me, she called me to the stage. And now, my little sister Marin has prepared a special surprise for us, Talia announced into the mic. It was the exact moment she had been waiting for all night. The public affirmation of our family hierarchy. The moment the ugly duckling stumbled on stage to make the swan look better. I walked up the carpeted steps, the small, black AV remote feeling cool, heavy, and solid in my sweating palm. I stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone. I looked out. 100 faces were staring up at me. I saw my parents in the front row, holding hands, looking tense. I saw Desmond standing near the front, his arms crossed over his chest, a look of amused condescension plastered on his face. The room was completely quiet, expectant. Thank you, Talia, I began, my voice ringing out clear and surprisingly steady through the massive speakers. I don't have a long, funny speech prepared tonight. I've always been a very private person. I've always believed that actions speak significantly louder than words. And lately, I've been made aware of some very, very interesting actions. I paused and looked directly down at Desmond. His amused smile faltered just a fraction of an inch. Desmond, in particular, has shown a truly remarkable, intense interest in the deeply complex world of forensic accounting AI, I continued, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. He's been so incredibly curious about my little side project. So, I thought instead of a traditional toast, I would share a little bit of that specific project with all of you tonight. If you've made it this far, please do me a favor, like the video and comment number 1 down below. It lets me know how awesome you are and shows that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let's get back to my story. I didn't wait for a reaction. I raised my hand and pressed the button on the remote. The massive screen directly behind me flickered out of the romantic slideshow. It went completely black for one terrifying second. Then, it flared back to life. It wasn't a PowerPoint presentation. It wasn't a video of college friends. It was a raw, high-definition screen recording. The bright white date and timestamp from 48 hours ago were flashing in the bottom right corner. The screen showed a user actively logged into VCF's highly secure corporate network. The mouse cursor on the screen was moving frantically, aggressively trying to open restricted firewall directories, clicking rapidly, desperately trying to bypass the security protocols of my honeypot. A collective, highly confused gasp went through the crowded room. People leaned forward, squinting at the code on the screen. In the front row, my mother put a trembling hand over her mouth. My father was half out of his seat, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple. Then, the AV tech hit the audio switch. Desmond's voice, sharp, furious, and absolutely unmistakable, boomed through the country club's surround sound system. Come on, push through the firewall. Find the core algorithm directory, his recorded voice yelled. The room went absolutely, deathly silent. You could have heard a single pin drop onto the thick carpet. We just need to rip the source code right now, and we can build our own clone in-house by next quarter, the recorded Desmond continued, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. By the time we launch, the pathetic little accounting nerd who built this garbage will never even know what hit her. I stood perfectly still at the podium, watching the sheer devastation ripple through the crowd. Desmond's face was entirely drained of blood. He was as white as a fresh sheet of paper. He looked like he had been physically turned to stone, his eyes wide and locked onto the massive screen behind me in absolute, unadulterated terror. Talia stared at the screen, then slowly turned to look at Desmond, her jaw literally hanging open. Her expression was a chaotic mixture of profound confusion and dawning horror. The video recording continued to play on the massive screen for another torturous 30 seconds. It clearly showed Desmond directing a small team of developers in a conference room, actively trying to forcefully bypass my security measures. It recorded his loud frustration, his naked, unapologetic greed, and his absolute, venomous contempt for the anonymous founder he was actively trying to rob blind. When the video finally ended and the screen went black, I let that final, incredibly damning sentence hang heavily in the silent, suffocating air of the ballroom. I took a deep breath, leaned into the microphone, and broke the silence. "The pathetic little accounting nerd he is referring to in that recording," I said, my voice ringing out with a terrifying clarity I had never felt in my entire life. "That's me." I paused, letting the massive weight of that statement sink into the brains of 100 wealthy socialites. The AI company he and his venture capital fund were actively, illegally trying to steal from tonight is Aurelia Analytics. And Aurelia Analytics is my company. I looked out into the crowd and locked eyes directly with Mr. Sterling. He was standing near the back, holding a glass of scotch, watching the entire dramatic scene unfold with a grim, hard, completely unreadable expression. "And there is just one more thing I need to share to complete this toast," I said, turning my gaze back down to where Desmond was standing, frozen in terror. "You mentioned at dinner that you were looking to acquire a brilliant AI company. You were absolutely right to be looking. But you're too late." I gripped the edges of the podium. Sterling Westwood, Mr. Sterling's global conglomerate, officially finalized the massive acquisition of my company this morning. As of tomorrow at 8 a.m., Aurelia Analytics will become their new, premier AI innovation division. I let the absolute, crushing tension build in the room, my eyes burning a hole straight through Desmond. "And as part of that acquisition deal," I continued, my voice steady and cold, "I have accepted a new role. I will be heading up that entire division as vice president." So, in a very funny way, you were right, Desmond. Your fund should be very interested in my work. Because as of tomorrow morning, your firm answers to Sterling Westwood for funding. Which means, as of tomorrow morning, I am your boss's boss. The sheer, undeniable finality of that statement hit the ballroom like a physical shockwave. Talia literally swayed on her expensive high heels. She reached out, her hand gripping Desmond's tuxedo sleeve for physical support. Desmond violently shook her hand off, stepping away from her, his face a horrifying mask of total disgust, panic, and public humiliation. My parents looked like they had just watched someone die. In the back of the room, Mr. Sterling slowly placed his scotch glass down on a passing waiter's tray. He stood up straight, looked directly at me on the stage, and gave a single, slow, incredibly decisive nod of approval. It was all the confirmation anyone in that room needed. The verdict was in. The trial was over. The case was permanently closed. This was the exact moment that changed my entire existence. The exact moment I finally, completely took back control of my own life. The party didn't just end, it completely and utterly imploded. It shattered into a million uncomfortable pieces. People immediately started murmuring, covering their mouths, casting shocked, disgusted glances at Desmond, Talia, and my parents. And then, like water draining from a tub, the guests began quietly, rapidly slipping away toward the coat check. No one wanted to be associated with the massive, radioactive fallout of a corporate espionage scandal. Talia stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor for another 10 seconds, staring at the empty space where her perfect life used to be. Then, she let out a choked sob, turned, and fled the ballroom, pushing aggressively past stunned guests, her expensive ivory dress swishing frantically behind her. Desmond didn't follow her. He didn't even look at her. He just stood there, his face completely pale, staring up at me on the stage with a look of dawning, absolute horror. He wasn't looking at his fiance's pathetic, loser sister anymore. He was looking at the powerful executive who had just publicly, ruthlessly detonated his entire career and his perfectly curated life. I stepped down from the podium, handed the microphone to the terrified AV tech, and started walking toward the exit. Mr. Sterling made his way through the rapidly dispersing crowd and stepped directly into my path. He extended his hand, and I shook it. This time, there was a completely new level of deep, professional respect in his sharp eyes. "Well, Marin. That was highly unorthodox," Mr. Sterling said, a very wry, tight smile playing on his lips. "But incredibly effective. You did the exact right thing. Integrity is the single asset in this world you cannot put a price tag on." He glanced over his shoulder. I followed his gaze and saw a tall, severe-looking woman with a sharp haircut standing near the bar. She was speaking frantically and intensely into her cell phone, glaring daggers at Desmond. "That woman right there is Ms. Vance, Desmond's managing director at VCF," Mr. Sterling noted quietly. "I strongly imagine Desmond will be hearing from a ruthless corporate lawyer long before he ever hears from HR on Monday morning. We at Sterling Westwood absolutely do not do business with common thieves." He gave me one final, respectful nod and walked out the front doors, leaving a wide trail of quiet authority in his wake. Ms. Vance caught my eye, gave me a curt, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, and then she too turned and marched out to her car. The message was loud and clear: Desmond was completely, professionally finished. I didn't stay to watch the catering staff clear the untouched cake. I grabbed my coat and walked out the side doors, heading toward the concrete parking garage. My heels clicked loudly in the damp, echoing space. I almost made it to my dented sedan. But they caught me near the elevator banks. It was a desperate, broken little delegation: my father, my mother, and Talia, her makeup completely ruined by streaks of black mascara. "Marin, wait," my father yelled out, his voice echoing loudly off the concrete walls. I stopped walking, but I didn't turn around right away. I just stood there, my hand resting on my car door handle, and waited. "You can't just walk away from this," my mother shrieked, her voice trembling violently with a raw, ugly fury that was rapidly replacing her initial shock. "You have embarrassed this entire family in a way I never, ever thought possible. You completely humiliated your sister in front of everyone. You destroyed her entire future." I finally turned slowly to face them. The harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the parking garage cast long, deeply distorted shadows across their faces. Standing there, they suddenly looked incredibly small, frail, and pathetic. "My future was the one currently on the chopping block," I said, my voice completely level and completely devoid of any emotion. "Desmond was actively trying to steal my life's work. Did you happen to hear that part on the recording? Or were you all just too hyper-focused on your precious social embarrassment to care that your future son-in-law is a criminal?" "He was just ambitious," my father spat defensively, his face red. "Maybe he went a little too far with the computer stuff. But you handled this with absolutely zero class. You aired our dirty laundry in public. It officially stopped being our family laundry the exact moment you chose the thief over me," I replied, taking a step toward them, feeling completely fearless. "It stopped being our laundry every single time you praised Talia just for breathing, and aggressively criticized me for actually succeeding. You never wanted a second daughter. You just wanted a shiny reflection of yourselves. And when I wasn't exactly that, you tried for 30 years to break me." Talia stepped forward, sobbing openly now. "Desmond is leaving me. A quiet breakup would have been less messy than this. Marin, you could have just pulled me aside and told me privately." I stared at her, and then I laughed. A real, actual, loud laugh that echoed in the garage. "Told you? You want me to have told the woman who laughed the absolute loudest when her fiancé called my entire life's work adorable? You wouldn't have listened to a word I said, Talia. You never listen to me. You just wait for your turn to speak." A heavy, suffocating silence fell between us in that cold parking garage. In that exact moment, looking at their angry, tear-stained faces, I saw the absolute, terrifying truth. They weren't sorry. They weren't horrified by the corporate betrayal or the attempted theft of millions of dollars. They were entirely, selfishly horrified that I had revealed the ugly truth to their country club friends. They were furiously angry that I had permanently upset the incredibly delicate balance of their fake world, a world entirely built on the highly convenient fiction of my mediocrity. "I'm done," I said quietly. But the two words carried the massive weight of a final, heavy judge's gavel. I am completely done being your disappointment. I am done being your stepping stone to make yourselves feel better. I am done needing your approval. My mother started to violently sob, leaning against my father, but I knew they were tears of deep frustration, not genuine remorse. "What about us?" she wailed. "After absolutely everything we've done for you? What you've done is teach me an incredibly valuable lesson," I said, looking each of them directly in the eye, one by one. "You taught me that sometimes, the family you are unfortunately born into isn't the family you have to keep. Goodbye." I opened my car door, got in, locked it, started the engine, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I watched them standing there, three rapidly shrinking figures bathed in the harsh, buzzing light of the parking garage. As I merged onto the highway, driving into the dark night, I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt completely, wonderfully free. 6 months can feel like an entire lifetime when you finally start living for yourself. The world certainly didn't stop turning after the infamous engagement party, but my personal world was entirely reborn. The corporate merger with Sterling Westwood went through completely flawlessly. We moved out of our dingy, brown-carpeted office and into a massive, glass-walled suite downtown. My new official title on my door read, Marin, Vice President of AI Innovation. It sounded absurdly corporate, and my salary was a number I still had trouble wrapping my head around, but the actual work was absolutely everything I had ever dreamed of. I finally had massive resources. I had a dedicated team of brilliant, passionate minds working under me who constantly challenged and deeply respected me. I had a boss, Mr. Sterling, who treated me as a true, equal partner in the business. We weren't just sitting in a dark room detecting basic fraud anymore. We were building massive, complex predictive models to actively prevent global financial crises. We were creating tools that could genuinely help protect people's pensions and savings. My little spreadsheet project was actively changing the financial world. But the transition wasn't just professional. It was deeply, wonderfully personal. The quiet, reserved, terrified Marin who avoided eye contact and confrontation began to completely fade away. In her place was a woman who spoke with clear confidence in crowded boardrooms, who wasn't afraid to firmly voice her opinion, who finally, truly trusted her own judgment. The pathetic ghost from the Sunday family dinners was finally exorcised. I reconnected with old college friends, the ones I had totally neglected during the exhausting years I spent coding in isolation. I even started dating again. Very cautiously at first, but with a brand new, rigid understanding of what a healthy relationship actually looked like. It wasn't about power dynamics, social standing, or wearing the right designer coat. It was about mutual respect and kindness. It was an absolute revelation. As for my family, for the most part, there was only silence. I blocked their numbers the morning after the party. But you can never completely escape the gossip mill. I heard through various mutual acquaintances that the social fallout had been absolutely catastrophic for them. Talia and Desmond's breakup was immediate, vicious, and incredibly ugly. Desmond was immediately fired from VCF, escorted out of the building by security. He was currently entangled with a very aggressive corporate lawyer trying to keep himself out of federal prison for attempted corporate espionage. Talia had tried desperately to salvage her pristine reputation, acting like the innocent victim, but the story of the video had spread like a massive wildfire through their elite social circles. She was no longer the golden child, she was the foolish woman who had been completely played by her criminal fiancé and publicly dismantled by the sister she used to mock. People loved to watch a golden idol fall. The gossip felt as intense and messy as a terrible divorce. She lost her wealthiest clients. She lost her arrogant swagger. She lost the only thing that had ever truly mattered to her, her flawless image. I didn't actively revel in their misery. Honestly, I rarely thought about them at all anymore. It was like a highly annoying background noise that had finally, blissfully been switched off. One Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in my glass office, having a cup of incredibly expensive coffee with Jolene, when my desk phone rang. It was a direct line, an unknown local number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick it up. Marin? Hello, it's Mrs. Gable from the old neighborhood. I was stunned. Mrs. Gable had been our next-door neighbor for 20 years. She was a sweet, quiet widow who loved gardening and was a longtime friend of my mother's. Mrs. Gable. Hi. It's so incredibly good to hear your voice, I said, genuinely surprised and sitting up straight. Oh, dear, I'm so sorry to bother you at your fancy new work, she said, her voice a little raspy. I was sitting in the back at that engagement party, Marin. And I just wanted to call and tell you. I have been waiting 30 long years for someone to finally stand up to your parents and your sister. I always knew you were the special one. The quiet ones always are. I am so terribly, terribly proud of the woman you've become. Hot tears immediately pricked my eyes. To be seen, truly and accurately seen, by someone who had been there watching from the sidelines all along, it meant more to me than any massive promotion or 8-figure paycheck ever could. It was a validation that came from a place of pure, simple kindness. We chatted for a few minutes more about her garden before she hung up. But right before she clicked off, she said something that stayed with me forever. Your mother and father, Marin, they bet all their money on the wrong horse. And now they are painfully learning that a pedigreed show horse that refuses to run is just a very, very expensive mouth to feed. It was a harsh, rural analogy, but a devastatingly true one. They had invested absolutely everything into Talia, and as I would soon find out, the final, crushing bill was finally coming due. Another full month passed. It was a rainy Thursday. I was standing in my office, sketching out a highly complex roadmap for a new predictive algorithm on my whiteboard, when my assistant buzzed the intercom. Marin, I'm so sorry to interrupt. There is a woman named Maud on line 2. She says she's your mother and it's an absolute, life-or-death emergency. My blood instantly ran cold. Despite all my newfound freedom and therapy, the word emergency from a parent still triggers a deep, primal fear in your gut. Was my father in the hospital? Had there been a terrible car accident? I snatched the phone off the receiver. Mom? What's wrong? Is Dad okay? It wasn't a medical emergency. It was the exact kind of emergency I should have fully expected from them. Marin, you have to help your sister right now, my mother cried into the phone. Her voice was tight, shrill, and laced with a desperate, highly manufactured panic. There was no hello. No, how have you been? Just a frantic demand. I slowly leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, a deep, weary sense of resignation washing over my entire body. I stared out the rain-streaked window at the city skyline. Help her with what, exactly? Her entire life is falling apart, she screamed into the receiver. She lost her job at the real estate agency. The country club revoked her membership. Her wealthy clients won't even return her phone calls. And Desmond, that monster Desmond, is actually having his lawyer sue her for defamation and emotional distress. She is a complete mess, Marin. She is going to lose her house. She desperately needs you. I stayed completely silent, letting her frantic, selfish words hang in the empty air of my office. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was almost impressive. After absolutely everything that had happened, after 30 years of abuse and a public attempt to steal my company, She was literally calling me to fix the massive financial mess her golden child had created. "What exactly do you expect me to do about Talia's life choices, Mom?" I asked, my voice dangerously, terrifyingly calm. "You're successful now," she yelled, saying the word successful as if it were a dirty accusation. "You have all that tech money. You have a massive salary. You have high-level connections. You could. I don't know, you could give her a substantial loan to pay off Desmond's lawyer. You could introduce her to Mr. Sterling to get her a job. Help her get back on her feet. She is your sister." "She is my sister," I agreed softly. "The same sister who stood by, drank champagne, and laughed out loud while her fiancé actively planned to destroy my life and steal my company. The sister who called me a pathetic failure my entire life. You are asking me to financially reward that exact behavior?" Her voice instantly turned sharp. The fake desperation completely morphed back into her familiar, cutting, toxic tone. "This is entirely your fault, Marin. You know, if you hadn't made that absolutely disgusting, dramatic scene at the country club, none of this would have ever happened. You did this to her." And there it was. The ultimate deflection. The complete, pathological refusal to accept even an ounce of responsibility for their own actions. "No," I said, my voice firm and unyielding like steel. "I didn't do this. Talia's choices did this. Desmond's greed did this. And your terrible parenting choices did this. Our choices," she shrieked so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "We gave you girls absolutely everything." Then, in her blind anger and absolute frustration, she slipped. She let the final, ugly, devastating truth slip out of her mouth. The one single piece of the puzzle that explained the entire dynamic of my childhood. "We invested everything we had into Talia," she sobbed, breaking down completely. "Your father and I, we took our entire retirement savings. We took the money we had set aside for your college fund. We remortgaged the house and put it all into Talia's commercial real estate ventures to get her started. We thought she was the sure thing. We thought she was going to take care of us." She gasped for air. "Now the market shifted, her reputation is ruined, and it's all completely gone, Marin. The savings. The inheritance. Everything. We are going to lose the house. And you're just sitting up there in your fancy glass office doing absolutely nothing." The inheritance. The college fund. The words landed heavily in the space between us, hitting the floor like blocks of solid ice. I stopped breathing for a second. It had never been about love. It had never been about which daughter they were genuinely more proud of. It had always, strictly, entirely been about money. It was a cold, calculated financial equation. Talia was their high-yield, high-risk growth stock. They dumped all their capital into her, expecting a massive payout. I was just the forgotten, low-yield savings bond earning absolutely negligible interest in a dusty drawer. Their entire family structure, the lavish praise, the constant disappointment, the blue ribbon thrown in the trash, it was all just toxic portfolio management. And their prize investment had just completely, spectacularly crashed to zero. Sitting there, looking at my beautiful office, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt a strange, detached sense of profound pity for them. They were so incredibly blinded by image, status, and money that they had completely missed the real, actual value of having a family that loved them. They had gambled their entire lives on a shiny, empty shell. "I see," I said softly, the ultimate realization washing over me. "Well, Mom. That certainly explains absolutely everything. Are you going to transfer us the money to help us or not?" she demanded, her voice returning to a harsh bark. "I am not going to give you a single penny," I said, my voice light and completely free. "But I will give you a piece of advice. I have the direct phone number of an absolutely excellent financial lawyer. He specializes heavily in elderly bankruptcy and extreme debt management. I'll email it to your personal account right now. The stunned, horrified silence on the other end of the line was infinitely more satisfying than any screaming match or public confrontation could ever have been. That is all you can do for your own flesh and blood," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute disbelief. "That is all I am willing to do," I corrected her, my tone completely final. "My help is no longer on the table. My wallet is permanently closed. Have a good life, Mom. Goodbye." I gently placed the phone back on the receiver. It made a soft, incredibly satisfying click. I stood up, walked over to my whiteboard, picked up my marker, and went right back to work, building the beautiful, secure future that I had earned all by myself.